All right, now I'm joined by Lewis Smith, who is the Manager of National Projects with the Canada Safety Council. Lewis, thanks so much for coming on to the show today.
My pleasure, Adele. Thanks so much for having me.
With the long weekend coming up, Victoria Day weekend is coming up here pretty soon. Just, what are, I guess, some of the things that, you think that, drivers should be just aware of when going out to wherever they're heading out to for the long weekend?
Well, usually when we talk in the context of long weekends in road safety, there are a few things that tend to come up more often than others. One, the most obvious one, volume on the roads is probably going to be increased. That's a little bit tricky to say relative to past years, what we'll see this year, because obviously COVID has thrown a little bit of a wrench in our ability to sort of track all of that. But it's fair to say that there are going to be more drivers on the road this weekend. And with that usually comes a little bit more of a focus on defensive driving. We encourage drivers to brake slowly, steadily, not suddenly. Also a good way to avoid wasting gas, which we all know is a bit of a premium these days. Beyond that, of course, when we're talking about long weekends and revelry, there's usually some element of intoxication that comes into play. So it's always a good idea to be on the watch for impaired drivers, whether that's through alcohol or through drugs. But our main focus this week in the context of National Road Safety Week is on showcasing all of the great ways that we can stay safe in addition to defensive driving. Obviously, that's the number one skill. We'll never say that it's a bad thing to have. You're always better off knowing what you're doing and approaching driving carefully, because we're working at high speeds with fairly heavy machinery.
So Alberta RCMP last year, they removed over a total of 101 impaired drivers. How important is it to have that police presence out on the roads during this long weekend, especially during, on the major highways?
I think that's a conversation that happens very often in the context of both intoxicated or impaired driving and in context of distracted driving. It's one thing to have the laws on the books. They're there for very good reason, and the punishments tend to fit the crime for the most part. But a law is not useful if it's not being enforced. So that police presence being there to enforce the law is important. Equally important is the personal responsibility in drivers not to cause that situation in the first place. Because if you're an impaired driver who's getting pulled over, well, one, you're part of the problem. But two, that's a police resource that can't be used on another stop. So it's important not to lean entirely on police presence when it comes to, not breaking the law in the first place. But they're an important aspect of this that needs to be included.
What are some other, resources that you feel like drivers can, use and be aware of when they're on the road with, other drivers who are, can be fairly aggressive during this time of the year?
Yeah, well, it all comes back to defensive driving, essentially. Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of drivers who, especially in the context of the past couple of years, tend to drive a little bit more aggressively than we did before everything shut down. And the end result is that not all drivers are behaving predictably, which is the number one rule when it comes to defensive driving. You want to drive predictably. You want to make it so that other drivers know what to expect of you and can react accordingly. So the whole concept of defensive driving relies around the fact that you are planning for the worst case scenario. If it doesn't happen, great, you're safe. If it does happen, great, you're able to stay safe. And often when we're driving, some of these skills do come naturally. They are second nature. If you see brake lights in front of you, you're probably going to hit the brakes. But at the same time, a lot of it is multitasking. And there are some aspects that, we may get right 99 times out of 100, but that 100th time is where the issue lies. And that's where that's where technologies like driver assist technologies, things like rear braking, things like rear view cameras, blind spot warnings, all these great technologies can exist to sort of supplement us and help support us when our defensive driving skills lapse a little bit.
That's great that you mentioned about the driver technology, because my next question after was going to be about dash cams. It's something that I feel has been something that's been very rarely, like pretty much popular as of late. I think just even here in the city, in Lloydminster, there's been signs around just saying, get your dash cams right here. I guess just how important is it to have a dash cam, and is it something that can, you can actually use if you do get into an accident?
Yeah, dash cams are definitely an interesting part of road safety, but they fall more along the lines of after the fact. This is assuming that a collision has happened. It's nice to be able to have some kind of videographic evidence to show. So it's not just a he said, she said situation. You really have the issue sort of memorialized. At the same time, while dash cams are useful, we don't recommend them as a safety device per se, because the safest thing to do is just avoid the collision entirely.
First off, Lewis, just thanks so much for coming on today. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with me, and hope you have a good rest of your day.